And Rachel, I mean, we touch on sort of things in the report about the cycle of crises that the government seems to be getting itself into, and you see it again with prisons today. We really did lose quite a lot of control there, and it's not as though we can announce here's an extra bunch of money and it's all sorted. We still have long-running problems with staff relations and other sort of things. You had an fascinating article today on adult social care, sort of just touching on the, how do we fund and how do we make some of the political choices. And I think it does take you on from what Richard says, the things that actually people might have thought we couldn't do in 2010, but actually we proved we were able to do, driving some of the efficiencies. Actually, the public service was quite good at that, I think. But some of the bigger changes, which involve much more politics, how you reconfigure a health system, all know about A&E closures and things like that. You were talking today about inheritance tax or variants of self-insurance, which would be taken from legacies. Those are really difficult political decisions. So both the short-term politics of how you get out of a cycle of crisis, but actually the long-term policies, we're really going to do these sort of big transformations. How do we build a political consensus around them? Because it's not just a data exercise and an internal Whitehall decision. So any thoughts on any of that?
The first thing that struck me really is the role of the Treasury in all this, and the Treasury is only obsessed by money, and the Treasury drives the whole of Whitehall, and that's all about the money, the statistics, the figures, how much, efficiency, how many times can we cut red tape, efficiency savings, all of this. And even George Osborne, I interviewed him after the Brexit vote, and he admitted he'd become too obsessed by the finances, and he'd misunderstood that actually there's more to life than money, and when it came to Brexit, the public were interested in other things, cultural issues like immigration, and he said his generation of politicians, he felt, had got stuck in this mindset of it's the economy stupid, from that famous James Carville-Warham message in the Clinton years. And I think there's something about that with the Treasury, which of course drives the whole of Whitehall policy. It's the austerity stupid, if you like, that's driven it, especially when it's all been about saving money and it's all been about the figures at the bottom line rather than how you transform the services to improve the performance. So that leads to also a sort of lack of understanding of how individual policies are going to impact on the services in other ways. So, for example, the Francis Review, as Emily said, led to a big expansion of the number of nurses. But of course, the hospitals weren't able to pay for that. There's an impact on immigration. The government hadn't trained enough nurses. So the decisions that are made for the short term, in that case, it was a response to a political crisis, but it's the same thing with the financial short-term decisions. And similarly with social care, the Treasury looking to save money, it's cut local government budgets, nobody cares about local government, it's boring, nobody's going to notice that, whereas the NHS is going to be all over the front pages if we cut their budgets. But before they know it, it's social care's on the front pages because of the impact on hospitals, deferred transfer figures, as you showed there. And I think the other important point is that government isn't just about data, it's about politics, obviously, and that's also about emotion and how people feel about things. And politicians are very frightened of making these big, often controversial arguments. You look at, with the NHS, the rows that there have been over hospital closures. I saw a cabinet minister last week, just before the Copeland by-election, who said if we get through this by-election without promising to save that bloody maternity unit, it'll be a triumph for something. And actually, to Theresa May's credit, she did manage to hold off the calls to save it. And but actually, that's quite unusual. You look at going back not just at by-elections. There's a brilliant line in Ken Clarke's memoirs where he talks about going to visit another maternity unit somewhere, which had been slated. He was health secretary, and he'd said he was going to shut this maternity unit. And he arrives, the main consultant says this place is a death trap, you've got to get rid of it. The local MP says, I've got constituencies dying in this unit, you've got to close it down. But neither of them would go out publicly and back him when he went out to meet the angry protesters outside. And there's that sort of, people don't want to, if you like, make the public face up to the decisions that need to be taken. Prisons is another very good example of that, actually. The real issue with prisons, as everyone knows, is overcrowding. There are too many prisoners in the jails for the capacity, so therefore the prisons can't rehabilitate them properly. People are living in overcrowded cells, that leads to violence, suicide rates and all of that sort of thing. But no politician's willing to confront the issue of sentencing and say, actually, the prison numbers have rocketed over the last 30 years. If we even went back to the level they were when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, we'd have a better chance of actually making the prisons both under control and also work better. Michael Gove actually did think about that when he was Justice Secretary, but it was absolutely impossible to get it past number 10 because of this sort of fear among the spin doctors of how the tabloids would react to any kind of soft on crime policy. And then it's exactly the same issue on social care, where the big issue is funding. So who's going to pay for it? Which politician is going to make the argument for tax rises? Is that going to be income tax rises, or, as I'm told, they're looking at some form of asset tax? So whether that's a version of the death tax, as the Tories called Labour's plan in 2010, or some kind of insurance that people then repay the money for their care after their death. So these are really big and controversial decisions and debates that I think politicians are often too frightened to have. So you get back to this sort of sticking plaster, get through the next month, let's just try and keep this off the front pages for a few more weeks. But then the problems build underneath the sort of headline performance.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And I think you touched on so many things. I found myself on social media today defending the HMT, the Treasury, saying it was possibly part of the solution. And I think actually your comment about Theresa May and indeed Philip Hammond, I think there is actually quite a seriousness about the approach now on the political side to some of these issues. It'll be interesting to see. We'll be watching the budget quite carefully to see what the positioning is. Is it a sort of sense of denial, or is there a sense of we actually have to get serious plans in place that we can, if necessary, backward expenditure?
My sense is that the budget next week will be get through the next few months, but then the next budget will be the moment where they unveil some really quite radical thinking on social care, perhaps business rates, and really look at some of the underlying plans.
Excellent, just in time for our second edition of Performance Tracker.
Exactly.